It's very much a privilege to be here, especially for our team from Bitcoin Beach to be at the Surfin'Bitcoin conference. It feels like it was made for this. So I get the privilege to introduce the economic minister from El Salvador. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to come here in person. We were trying to get her here, and I know she would have loved it. But her name is Maria Luisa, and it feels surreal for me because I was actually sitting in her office less than a year and a half ago, actually, with Chimbera Roman, who's part of the Bitcoin Beach team, and we were spending 3 hours with her team, sitting in her office, trying to convince her of all the benefits that could come to El Salvador if they would adopt Bitcoin as their official currency. And we kind of ran through the fact that because they're already using the US dollar, they didn't have to worry about it competing with their own national currency, so they didn't have any concerns about that, and that it would drive tourism, that there would be Bitcoiners from around the world that would trek to El Salvador in order to be able to spend their Bitcoin. We talked about the financial inclusion that we were seeing happening in El Zonte. These people who had never had bank accounts were now making remote transactions, receiving remittance payments from relatives in the US, zipping money across the country to relatives on the other end of the country when they needed $5 worth of Bitcoin just to buy, a loaf of bread and some milk, and that all these benefits would come, but most importantly, that it would help El Salvador shed this kind of shadow that had hung over the country of the trauma that the country has been through with the Civil War, with the gang issues. I'm sure for most of you, if you've heard El Salvador mentioned in the past, it's always been in a negative light. And so we were sharing with them that this would be an opportunity for them to kind of reset the image of El Salvador overnight and have it go from a place that was known for having the highest murder rate in the world to a place that was leading the world forward in financial freedom. And that the president, Nayib Bukele, who was a real risk taker, who wants to see the country change for the people, this would be a way for him to cement his place in the history books and really show that a country can be transformed. And so I'm going to play a little video here and let her share herself some of the things that they're seeing happening in El Salvador.
Hello everyone, it is a pleasure for me to greet you from El Salvador. El Salvador is now in the map for its innovative approach to achieve an inclusive and sustainable economic growth, specifically through its recent adoption of Bitcoin as its second legal tender. In a country with the largest part of its population without access to savings, credit, and payment services, the government of El Salvador, under the leadership and determination of President Nayib Bukele, pushed forward this transformational initiative that has opened new financial opportunities for its citizens. In a very short period of time, and through the use of e-wallets now available in the market, El Salvador's population, including the most vulnerable one, has now the possibility to accumulate wealth, and in the case of small merchants in small towns, they now have access to payment platforms that they would have otherwise not been able to access. Some have now digital reports of their sales and purchases, just like a multinational company does. This innovative public policy has contributed to attract new investments in the fintech and cryptocurrency sector. Almost a year after Bitcoin was adopted as a legal tender in El Salvador, more than 55 companies have registered and are part of our Bitcoin ecosystem, including digital wallets, custodial services, exchanges, payment solutions, smart legal contracts, among others. Some of these companies are looking to test innovative products in El Salvador to then scale up in the Latin American region and other regions around the world. Today, these companies and their founders come to our country inspired by the vision of President Bukele from countries such as Argentina, Estonia, Egypt, Singapore, Sweden, and the United States. Other sectors that have been positively impacted are the real estate and tourism, contributing to generating an increased investment, economic growth, and new employment opportunities in El Salvador. And finally, in terms of tourism, we're seeing increases in sales of local businesses, proven phenomenon in the coast of the country, namely Surf City. Today, El Salvador is experiencing the best economic performance in its history, including in a context with COVID-19, high levels of inflation, and high costs of maritime transportation. In 2021, we closed with a historical economic growth of 10.3%. Private investment reached 18.4% of our GDP, the highest since 1960. Exports have also experienced record high, and by April of 2021, we had already recovered 100% of the jobs that were affected by the pandemic. All this to make of El Salvador a nation where successful local and foreign companies are born and are able to grow. We also believe El Salvador has all the potential to continue hosting companies that are part of the crypto ecosystem, provide tech outsourcing of software development and other technological services, and leverage artificial intelligence to create solutions for the public and private sector. From the government of President Nayib Bukele, our commitment is to continue innovating in everything we do to accelerate economic growth and improve the quality of life of our population. I invite you all to be part of El Salvador's transformation and benefit from its strategic location that easily connects us with the rest of the world, the special incentive regimes, a green and diversified energy matrix with more than 80% of annual production coming from renewable energies, and all the opportunities ahead generated by adopting Bitcoin as a legal tender. Thanks so much for your attention, and we hope you can come and visit us and see the new version of El Salvador.
It's been just phenomenal to see the difference that adopting Bitcoin has made in El Salvador, especially in this day with all the things, countries that are being held back by COVID restrictions and their economies kind of in tatters. El Salvador is actually doing better than it ever has. And a lot of that has come down to adopting Bitcoin and the interest in the country. Every day there's companies coming in wanting to know how they can set up, bringing in good paying jobs. And it's been such a privilege to be able to play a small role in that and for our team to be a part of that. And so today, part of what we're going to do is just share a little bit of the background and the history of how Bitcoin Beach started. I'm not going to get too much in the details. We've done a number of podcasts. If you want to get more in-depth history, feel free to search one of those podcasts and do that. But today I just want to kind of touch an overview. But it was, I remember at the conference in Miami where Bukele made this kind of surprise announcement that El Salvador was adopting Bitcoin as legal tender. And I remembered all the promises that I made to the economic minister that would happen. And I panicked a little bit of, okay, I hope the companies come, I hope the tourists come, and they have. And it's more than I would have ever imagined. And so even though in the international press, a lot of times they want to focus on the negativity, some of the technical issues, some of the political opposition that doesn't want to see this happening, we're seeing the countries in the region, they are looking to El Salvador. They want to emulate what's happening there. They see the growth that's happening. And so I think 5 years from now, the world's going to be shocked at how quickly this thing kind of transpired. I'm going to ask a couple members of our team, Peter and Chimbera, if you guys can sit up here. They're going to share a little bit of their story with Bitcoin Beach, but I want to take you guys back to the beginning. We had been working in the small town of El Zonte, and I'm going to show a video in a second that'll give you guys a little bit more of a context of what El Zonte looks like. But we had been working in El Zonte for a number of years. El Zonte is a beautiful village, amazing people, but a lot of tragic history, a lot of gang violence. For most of the youth, their alternatives in life were to join the gangs or to try to sneak illegally into the U.S. And so we would see this kind of cycle of destruction of the young people growing up without hope, many of them joining the gangs. Because the gangs would grow, there would be less economic opportunity for the adults in town. And so a number of the fathers would leave, go to the U.S., feeling that was the only way that they could provide for their family. So you have these young people growing up without their parents in the home, which made them more susceptible to the gangs, which made the economy worse. And you saw this kind of spiral downwards. And we have seen in the last few years and Bitcoin playing a big role in it, how when the young people are given hope that they can break that cycle and you can see things kind of turn around and go in a positive direction. And so I'm going to play the video first just to give you a little context, and then I'll talk a little bit more about how Bitcoin Beach came to be. So this is from an upcoming movie called Dare to Dream, and it talks about the history of Bitcoin Beach.
My pre-arrival impressions of El Salvador were probably similar to many people. I never really heard much about the country other than it was a dangerous place.
Román es como mi hermano, crecimos juntos y los dos venimos de una lucha similar.
Esta era mi casa. We were living in the street for 7 years.
So this meeting was one of the weirdest meetings I've ever been to in my life. The donor wanted to remain anonymous.
Todo El Salvador puede tener acceso a una cuenta electrónica por primera vez.
He wanted to see a true Bitcoin circular economy take shape.
It all started with the people here on the ground.
It came from that dream to change this community.
Para mí Bitcoin es la herramienta más inclusiva para la humanidad.
Aquí no solo nos inspiramos en ellos, si funciona en una comunidad, lo podemos hacer país.
But I see Bitcoin as more of a tool that can bring fairness into the world.
We're just humans, and everyone deserves the same conditions.
We are an industrial-aged culture transitioning into a digital age, and we can't even begin to imagine where this takes us.
We're super excited when the full movie's coming out, I think in the next couple months, so we'll make an announcement on Twitter. I've been able to see it already, and it's absolutely fantastic, so I'm super excited about that. But I just wanted to give you guys a little context so you could visualize what the village of El Zonte looks like and kind of be able to see the environment that this grassroots effort took shape in. And so myself and Jorge, who's not able to be here, but also Roman and some other group of the people of the Bitcoin Beach team had been working in the community in El Zonte for a number of years, really specifically focused on the youth, of trying to provide them hope for the future, encourage them to continue in their education, and keep them out of the gangs. And a few years ago, I was introduced to somebody that said, hey, we had somebody donate some Bitcoin to our organization. I know you're into Bitcoin. Can you help us think through how to use it? So I helped them with that and didn't really think anything else of it. And a couple months later, they said, hey, do you want us to introduce you to this donor and see if they want to help with the work you guys are doing in El Salvador? And so we had this crazy meeting. It wasn't even with the donor. The donor wanted to remain anonymous, but it was with his representative. And he said, hey, put together a proposal for us. How would you create a circular Bitcoin economy in El Zonte and think totally crazy outside the box? And so we came back to them with a proposal that we would start injecting Bitcoin into the community, paying the youth to clean the rivers, the beaches, to work with the elderly in the community, and to start allowing them to accumulate Bitcoin. And then we would work with the stores and one by one get them to start accepting Bitcoin. And we would try to build this Bitcoin circular economy. And so that's how we started. It started with a very small group of young people. And then once COVID hit, we actually expanded to the whole community and started using Bitcoin as kind of a universal basic income for the 500 families that lived in El Zonte. They couldn't work, they were going hungry, and they needed a way to sustain themselves. And Bitcoin just fit perfectly. We could send it to them remotely. It allowed the stores to stay in business, to continue to service them. And so from there, one thing led to another and led to us being in the office with the Minister of the Economy. And then a few months later, the country of El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as legal tender. And I'm sure most of you have kind of seen those headlines, but today I wanted to allow both Roman and Peter to share their story of how they've seen Bitcoin transform El Zonte and El Salvador. And so I'm going to turn it over to Roman first. He was born and raised in El Zonte. He knows the struggles of both the beauty and the tragedy of growing up in El Salvador. And so I want to share about what he's seen and how Bitcoin has impacted his life.
Ça va? Je suis salvadorien, je m'appelle Roman, je parle anglais, italien, but I don't speak French, so sorry for, and I would love to speak French to share with you all the things that Bitcoin have been doing in our country, but we're going to do our best. And if it's not clear after the talk, you can come and we're more than happy to share everything we have been experiencing the last years in El Salvador. Who knows where El Salvador is? Wow. Did you imagine 2 years before someone asked, did you know where El Salvador is? You will know? No. These guys were living in El Salvador for a couple months, right? Paying everything with Bitcoin. So, nice. So, El Salvador definitely is another country. The narrative has been changing. Like people know our country now as a Bitcoin country, as the country that have good serve, have Bitcoin as a legal tender, have the president, Bukele, have Surf City, have Bitcoin City is coming, and we definitely invite all of you to come and visiting. So we grew up in El Zonte where the opportunities when we were kids were almost nothing, and I think all the dream was to leave the country, to get to the USA and working there, because there were not opportunities in our little town called El Zonte, now known by many people as a Bitcoin beach. And what we connecting now is that Bitcoin have been that tool that have been helping us to understand money, to have access to something that probably everyone have here, access to the financial system, something that we didn't have, something that my parents never had. And that's one of the reasons why I think they didn't change the reality, because we associated that for saving money we need to put it in the bank, but I will say in El Zonte maybe 90% of the people didn't have access to the bank account. So they couldn't save money, and they spending what they earn in 1 month, they spending in 1 month. And that have been the cycle. And now it's beautiful to see like people saving money for the first time, buying an asset for the first time, having that access to build their dreams step by step, you know, little by little. And when people say that Bitcoin is for everyone, it's for everyone. Like you can benefit here in France, but we can also benefit in El Salvador. Someone in Africa can benefit in a different way. I think this is one of the things that we need to understand, in that Bitcoin represent and will represent different things for everyone. For us, have been representing access to the financial system, access to transact digitally, access to buy an asset, for the merchants, access to receive and make digital payment. I see someone today order a coffee and grab their credit card and just like, psh. Well, I do that, but with Bitcoin. And I think it's more fast. But it's good to see that things, you know, and when you connect in that things and you say like, wow, we all can benefit from that. We need to understanding what Bitcoin representing for us, right? And so one of the things that I want to touch, because I think is super important, is before everyone was leaving the country, like Mike say, Mike and Peter they have been like two persons that have been believing in our community, that have been putting time, money. They're Salvadorian, and they are part of the reason what everything is happening now. So thank you. But I wanna share this because I see now people from all over the world, and you can tell them too, coming to El Salvador, people from Europe, people from Canada, people from the United States, coming to El Salvador and buying houses there, living there, finding hope and freedom. Those two things always have been connecting to the USA, to Canada and Europe. And to see that our country is providing that to everyone, that's exciting for me as a Salvadorian. And everyone is welcome there. And so yeah, I invite everyone to come down there and see it, because it's like, you will see it.
And you can stay at his house with him, right? Right, Roman? Like Roman was saying, it's interesting for us to come here and to hear all the speakers and have it so focused on like the financial asset side of it and the investment side, where we see Bitcoin as the financial rails, as the freedom, as the ability for people to make their day-to-day payments. And so I think for us, Bitcoin represents something that's very different than even a lot of things I've heard about today, and that's fine. Like Bitcoin can mean different things to different people. But I think us in the broader Bitcoin community have to realize that it's the real use of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin payment rails, that is actually going to be the only thing that can drive real adoption. If it's just a store of value, if it's just an asset that we're going to hold on to, it's not going to change the world. It's when it's circulating, it's when it's moving freely, it's when it's allowing people who could never have a bank account to now make electronic payments. That's where it brings freedom. And we've seen in El Salvador, since the Bitcoin law was passed, I mean, the growth in Lightning payments has been exponential. Before that, Lightning was kind of languishing. And once it started being used, once it was unleashed, we had companies like Galloy who came and built the Bitcoin Beach wallet for us, who sat down with the local people to understand what their real needs were in a wallet and make it really usable. And it's become this vibrant ecosystem now because of the real use. And so I think it's important for us to remember that it is places like El Salvador that are going to be what drives Bitcoin use forward. And I'm super excited. I have my good friend Peter here today to share some of his experience. He actually was in El Salvador before I was. I met him in El Salvador. And it was 2005 you guys moved there? So in 2005, him and his family moved down there. They were working with some economic development projects, with some different church projects. And I usually don't say this in places because, the tourism minister of El Salvador doesn't like me to, but Peter was actually shot in his first year in El Salvador, so he's never going to be the spokesman for tourism in El Salvador. But that was kind of the reality at that time. He was out traveling to a remote village, working in a work project that they were doing there, and he was shot kind of from out of the blue in the neck. You'll hear his voice it's a little deeper than it was before, and he and his family worked through that tragedy, worked through the next 5 years spent working in these development projects, and I think even during his time there, it was a struggle. They would see projects start to take hold and then kind of crumble, and then I think even after 5 years, there was a lot of questions on what does it mean to do real sustainable development in a country. And so it's been really exciting to see him come back and start to work with us at Bitcoin Beach and see a lot of these same types of initiatives, but with Bitcoin integrated into them. And so I'll let him share a little bit about the difference he's seen about using Bitcoin and how that impacts people's way of thinking. It makes them more long-term thinkers. It makes them plan for the future, and that's what makes development sustainable.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. We lived 2005 to 2010 in El Salvador. Did a lot of economic development work, a lot with microloans, and had some great stories. Had a lot of small businesses helped, but we always ran up against some larger issues, whether it be macroeconomic issues that would keep the businesses from growing or being able to have product to sell. But one of the biggest, two issues we were up against was a mindset of saving that was very hard to train. We would do extensive education, and you could do all the education if you want, and it a lot of times just would not be listened to because, like Ramon was saying, it was a cash-based, they spent what they earned. And then second, just a disconnectedness from kind of the global market and from resources, from people. And as we've worked in the Bitcoin Beach project, Mike and I have property on the other side of the country, and so we're doing projects there as well in Agua Fria. Those two hurdles are the two biggest things that I've seen removed. First, the mindset, the ability for them to have a wallet and to be able to think about assets and saving immediately. Like we did a training, and within weeks, you're seeing them process what it means to hold, to save, and then to be able to plan as a family. One of the businesses we work with in Agua Fria, the gal, she sells pupusas and beer, and it's right on a point break, which is very helpful if you surf. A lot of tourism. A couple Australians came out of the water, and they didn't have their wallets, their physical wallets. This was about a year and a half ago. And they said, hey, could we buy some pupusas and pay you later? She said, yeah, just pay me in Bitcoin. And as she tells the story, she says their faces were just in disbelief that they were in this back village of Surftown, and here is this gal selling pupusas informally using Bitcoin. Well, that same gal, over the course of a year, had saved $3,000 in Bitcoin and was able to pay cash, or it hadn't even become a tender yet, so exchange it to pay the surgery for her son that was going through something. So what would have been a devastating event for their family, she had been able to save. And then just the connectedness, to see the community that barely has internet out there feel like they're part of this global movement, feel very connected to Zonte, and to see how it really speeds up the learning process and speeds up the access to these assets. And seeing, more than anything, I think, and Mike alluded to it, just a sense of hope. And that, I think, was the most intangible barrier we had when we did work down there, was no matter what we did, the issues of the gangs, the issues of the economy, they just press down on people. And now, just in the last 2 years, it feels like obviously there's challenges, but there's a sense, and I'd say, especially with the young people, that El Salvador is the place to be, and they want to be there, and they're the ones that are driving a lot of the change. So, I think I've been part of El Salvador for almost 20 years, and I think it's probably the most hopeful time that I've ever been a part of it. So, thank you for letting us share.
So I think there's just a couple things that we would love for you guys to take with you today. Is one, obviously, come to El Salvador and visit and see it for yourself. But two, support these grassroots projects that are popping up around the world. We're actually working with a project in South Africa, Bitcoin Akasi. There's Bitcoin Lake in Guatemala. There's Bitcoin Jungle in Costa Rica. There's Motive in Peru. There's a number of these grassroots initiatives of creating Bitcoin circular economies and driving real Bitcoin use that we're excited to be a part of and that all of you guys can be a part of. And so, yeah, I would just invite you to look at the example of we didn't know what we were doing. We just went out there and took a little bit of risk and started pushing. And it's amazing to see the difference that can come from those sorts of things. I'm not sure, do we have time for questions? Or I don't know if the time clock's blinking at me up here, so. 2 questions? Is that was it? 8 minutes, okay. So I don't know, we would love to take some questions if there's somebody out there in the audience that has a mic.
Yeah, hey guys, thank you. Brilliant presentation. I was part of a panel this morning moderating 3 guys that were very interested in building trading facilities and to push trading Bitcoin onto people and to stake Bitcoin and DeFi and yield farming and all of this nonsense for those that are listening. And I think you guys have just made a huge case for why we just need to hold Bitcoin and use it as savings technology. So what would you say to anyone that's in this room right now that is thinking about trading or yield farming or staking their Bitcoin?
I mean, I think that speaks to a little bit of just the difference in the privilege of where people are at in life. And for me, that's a waste of time. That's a waste of the value of what Bitcoin can bring. I would much rather see people use their resources to bring financial freedom to the world. But, to each their own if that's how they want to use their Bitcoin. But that's not how Bitcoin is going to transform the world. Bitcoin is going to transform the world by breaking down the barriers, by breaking down this closed system. I think for me, coming from the US, from you guys from Europe, you're used to having access to all these things because you come from wealthy countries, and it's worth it for companies to jump through all the hurdles to provide you with financial services. But for countries like El Salvador, for most of Africa, for most of Latin America, it's just not worth it to jump through all these hurdles. And so a lot of these people have been excluded from the financial system. That's why, even 2 years ago, the vast majority of people in El Salvador didn't have bank accounts, where now more people have Bitcoin wallets than have bank accounts. And so that would be my reply is, I think those things are distractions. I think that the real value of Bitcoin is getting it in the hands of people and allowing it to be the freedom money that they use on a daily basis.
Can I, Mike? I would love to add like an example how we use Bitcoin daily. I'm going to send $10 to my friend in El Salvador right now. I'm going to use Bitcoin Beach Wallet. You can come here to talk to Nicolas. So I'm going to hit. I'm going to put the username.
And while he's doing that, my kids just messaged me yesterday, and they were like, hey, we need some Bitcoin. We need to buy dinner tonight. And it's so like second nature for us just to send it to them, where if I was trying to send them money to El Salvador, it would be a major issue.
Done. if we didn't have Bitcoin, we couldn't do that. Like in 1 second, these $10 that I send, they're in El Salvador. So maybe this use of case is new for everyone, but make sure that you don't leave and understanding what Lightning Network is. You have one of the best representing now here in this conference, that is Nicolas. And
Nicholas, raise your hand there.
you can talk to him because I think this is, if you hear that Bitcoin is not working, Bitcoin works. Lightning Network works. And you can see it, but it's depending who you listen to. And this is new, and there are many people saying different things. So I will say be careful who you listen, because you can get the wrong information. And yeah, thank you.
I had a question for you guys. You've gotten a lot of international attention since the Bitcoin law was passed, but I'm curious if you've gotten a lot of local attention too from locals to El Salvador coming to visit Bitcoin Beach because they've heard of the story there. So have you had people making pilgrimages from within the country to go check out El Zonte because they're curious about where this stuff all started?
Definitely. I mean, it's El Zonte has become inundated. It's hard to get a hotel room there anymore. There's people both internationally but also domestically that are coming that want to see, want to understand. I think the thing that's been most exciting to me has been seeing the number of Salvadorans who hadn't been to El Salvador for decades that are returning back for the first time, that in the past were scared, thought El Salvador was dangerous, and now they're seeing that El Salvador has been transformed. It has become a new country full of hope. And so when we get those kind of older generations who fled during the war or even have their kids come who had never even been to El Salvador and are re-experiencing their heritage and are proud to be Salvadoran, I mean, that's what's exciting, is to see those people return.
Hey, hi guys, it's good to see you again. So, for context, I'm an Italian podcaster, and in Italy we read the news after the last Bitcoin dip, and the headlines are El Salvador is doomed, he's going bankrupt, Bukele is a crazy dictator, Bitcoin is never gonna work. You guys look amazing to be Walking Dead. So, my question is, can you tell us what's really going on in the country, and especially how a Salvadorian are dealing with volatility? That, of course, is an issue.
I think a lot of times the headlines, they always want to focus on the Bitcoin price, and only when it's down, not when it's up. So we're used to that. And we all know this is a long-term process. And so we're not focused on the day-to-day price moves, and that's not to discount that there are challenges with volatility and that people need to learn and be able to understand that, especially businesses that are holding a significant amount of Bitcoin. But where we see the real growth and the real opportunity is the tourism that's being driven, the investment that's coming into the country, the high-paying jobs that are coming, all of those things, and that's what most of the people are focused on. The day-to-day price it's kind of like for most of us here at the conference. It's, when you first get into Bitcoin, you're really focused on the price. After you've been in Bitcoin a few years, not so much. You know that it doesn't really matter in the long term. I think we're out of time there, but we'll be here for the rest. Oh. One more. Okay.
Yeah, so have you had anyone argue about Bitcoin in El Salvador, like an El Salvadorian or like a...
It's become a political issue. So yeah, there are some people that want to politicize it and argue about it. But we've seen even the opposition political party there, the more they start to learn, they realize they don't want to be on the wrong side of this movement. So even they have started to back off from that. Well, thank you guys. We'll be here for the rest of the conference and happy to chat with you.
say one more thing?
Yes.
Please. Guys, who is looking an excuse to come down to El Salvador in November? Galoy is making for the second year adopting Bitcoin. Last year was an amazing conference, and this year's will be epic. So if you want to come, Nicolas is here too.
Yeah, and if you want nice stickers, please come to see me. I have nice stickers for adopting Bitcoin.